Hello my friends and fellow travelers, my name is Pierce, this is my channel Tales from the Road. Thanks so much for stopping by. Today we're going to talk about Panama. It's a Central American country with a colorful and vibrant spirit. And in this video, I'm going to tell you everything you need to know before you go, so that you can have an awesome trip to this beautiful South American nation. If that sounds good, let's get Panamanian. Vamos! So as we always do with these videos, let's talk a little bit about the geography, the culture, and the regional history so we can better understand Panama before we visit. Starting off with the geography, Panama is a true Central American country. It's really that bridge between South America and North America. It's got Costa Rica to its north, it's got Colombia to its south. Historically speaking, because it is this bridge, it has always been very strategically important for many different empires. First and foremost, we've got the indigenous communities that inhabited Panama in the pre-Columbian times. These indigenous communities, which of course can still be found in Panama today, were very ingenious with the ways that they made use of the land, as Panama is very hard to inhabit, having dense jungles, having pretty rough beaches, and just being disconnected in lots of ways from the regions around it. As we all learned in the history books, the Spanish Empire came to the New World and conquered much of Central and South America, Panama included. Panama for the Spanish Empire was actually incredibly important, as it was a good connection point for all of the Spanish trade and military activities going on between South America, Spain, and the Caribbean. That means that Panama City experienced lots of raids and warfare from the other warring colonial empires during the time. An interesting tidbit of history that you'll definitely see when you visit Panama City is the presence of Panama Vieja, or what they call Old Panama City. This was the initial colony that was built by the Spanish Empire, which was actually burned down by British pirates whose sole mission was to go around the Spanish colonial area and mess with their colonial holdings. Today, of course, on a trip to Panama, you'll be able to explore these old colonial cities and forts, and they're a good day trip from Panama City, so I would definitely recommend doing that. In more recent history, the most important thing you need to know about Panama is that it makes most of its money today from the Panama Canal, which was built in the early 1900s by the United States and France. This is easily one of the world's most important shipping lanes and generates billions and billions of dollars for the Panamanian government today. A trip to Panama without visiting the canal would be incomplete, and it's something I definitely recommend you checking out. That being said, Panama is now a vibrant Central American nation. It's a place that's very connected with the United States, a place that's changing and has a big, robust economy that's growing every year, and a place that many people are putting on their travel bucket list. So let's get on to the practical information so you can check this off of your travel bucket list. So first off, let's talk about visas. The visa process for Americans visiting Panama is incredibly easy. You can enter at a couple different ports of entry. Most people fly to Panama City directly from the United States, where they have tons of flights every day, specifically leaving from Houston and from Florida. You can also, of course, fly into Panama in some of the smaller airports or go by land via Costa Rica. The interesting thing about Panama is that while it does have a large land border with Colombia, there are no roads that connect it. This is actually called the Darien Gap, and it's one of the world's most dangerous areas. So if you're in Colombia and you want to visit Panama, do it by plane. Americans can typically stay in Panama visa-free for up to 90 days. So let's move on to money, because Panama actually has a very curious money situation. Technically, the currency of Panama is called the Balboa, named after one of the famous conquistadors who founded Panama. The Balboa theoretically trades at 1 Balboa to $1, but most Panamanians don't use Balboas at all, they just use the American dollar. Panama, I think 10 or 15 years ago, went through a dollarization process, which means that dollars are an acceptable and normalized currency throughout the entirety of Panama. The interesting thing about Panamanian money is that their hard currency is the Balboa, so like all coins that they give you or exchange are going to be Balboas, but anything over $1 is typically dollars. They use $1, $5, $10 like in the bills, but Balboas for the coins. Strange, but it happens. Also, you can find it in other countries like that around the world as well. Panama is a very modern country in a lot of senses, and credit card is definitely the way to go. I don't think I even touched 1 Balboa or $1 US while I was there. All card, all good. Transportation. The transportation of Panama is pretty simple, so let me break it down for you. Getting into the country, you're probably going to come in by plane, and you're probably going to come to Panama City, the capital. If you're not flying there, you can fly to the north to Chiriquí. There's a city called David, which has a reasonable size airport. If not, you're probably going to come from Costa Rica to the north by bus, and that's not terribly complicated, it's just really, really long. Getting around Panama is not the easiest thing. There are buses that of course go all over the country, although the roads in Panama, because of the pretty treacherous rain that it gets because it's right on the equator, as well as the fact that it's mountainous and jungly, doesn't make it the easiest country to get around as far as time is concerned. Because Panama City is a fully functional, like first world type city, it's really quite easy to get around. Many people use cars, although you can of course use taxi and Uber. They're existent and they're very, very readily available. The prices are actually quite low. Ubering in Panama City, in comparison to the other things, because Panama is actually a bit expensive, Ubering was quite cheap, quite easy. They also have integrated bus systems within the city if you want to get around by bus. It is not the most walkable city in the world, so you will be taking Ubers a lot of the places that you end up going. So now on to safety. Panama goes along with my general tips for South and Central America, which is you need to be aware of where you are. Panama is relatively safe. Of course, people live there, get around, function safely every day. However, safety is a concern for even local citizens. Make sure that you know where you're going. Make sure that you have internet connection in case you get into any problems. Don't walk around and look like a kind of a stupid tourist. Don't have your camera hanging out. Don't look like, hey, I'd like to get robbed today, because Panama is a place where people will of course rob you if they have the opportunity. That being said, if you travel anywhere around Panama with normal regard and respect for the rules and you don't look too obviously a tourist, you should be more than fine. Walking around in many of the major cities in Panama at night is also not super advisable, so I stick to the rule with after the sun goes down, take an Uber. So, who are the Panamanians and what is the language situation? The good news for you is that many Panamanians, especially the ones living in Panama City, speak English pretty well. It's pretty common that Panama City is full of a lot of international people from various Spanish-speaking countries. Could be Costa Rica, could be from South America. A lot of people from Miami also live in Panama half the time, and they've had a lot of like integration from the United States. So the language, of course, is Spanish with a twist of the Caribbean. It's kind of hard to understand Panamanian Spanish unless you really, really study that dialect. But there are a lot of English opportunities for you, as well as if you go to a restaurant, the menu could be in English. If you have a question, you can easily find a lot of Panamanians who have lived in the United States and who travel, so it's totally okay with English. Panama is like a really interesting mix of people, historically speaking, because they have a mix of lots of different Spanish speakers coming from many different countries who have settled in Panama. You also have a lot of immigrants coming from European countries that have made Panama their home. You also have a lot of people with African descent who of course came during the times of Spanish slavery, either from the Caribbean, which is why Panama has really, number one, really good Caribbean food, and number two, why they actually have a lot of native English speakers coming from a more patois sort of Caribbean dialect of English, which is also very notable and part of the Panamanian culture that separates itself from other Spanish-speaking areas and countries in the region. This means that Panama is a really cool melting pot with a lot going on, and it all comes together in its main capital city, Panama City. So now on to my favorite section, which is of course food. And I have to say Panama has killer food because it has that really nice South American sort of Spanish influenced cuisine, but they also have the benefit of having a lot of the immigrants coming from the Caribbean. So they have that spicy, interesting tropical flavors that you don't find in all the other cuisines of Latin America. Panamanian dishes that you should definitely try include the national dish, which is a nice soup, sort of like a chicken soup called sancocho. You can find this all over kind of Central and North South America, which is, it's a very typical soup, really good, really hearty. Secondarily, they make a lot of really nice things with the tropical ingredients, like different types of fruits and chiles make their way into the cuisine. They make something called patacones, which are basically deep fried plantains that they serve alongside many of the various sort of meat dishes that the Panamanians typically enjoy. Very delicious. Because you're probably coming to Panama on vacation, the alcohol is also good to know. So Panama makes some of the world's best rum because it sits in the Caribbean and has a really long history of Spanish rum culture, as well as pirating, which, you know, they love the rum. They also have Balboa beer, which is the national beer company. Pretty solid, very light, and nice when it's super, super hot, because it's always hot in Panama. If you want to check out real Panamanian food in a local restaurant that a lot of people love, there's this place called Fonda Lo Que Hay, which is in the center of Panama City. I believe they have 2 locations. They make all the traditional dishes. It's actually not terribly expensive to go try there. There's often lines, so maybe making a reservation is in your best interest if you want to try it, but I went there. The food is fantastic. Just order the whole menu, go for it. I was obsessed with it. Also, if you want to get some of that Caribbean flair that they have within Panamanian food, there was an awesome restaurant called La Tapa del Coco, where they make they call it like Caribbean Coast Panamanian food. It's very Jamaican influence. They have like jerk chicken and stuff like that, but also just like ridiculously tasty versions of the sort of Latin American foods that I know and love. This place is awesome. I actually ended up going there twice, and I'm not one who repeats restaurants, but this place had a lunch special, which was like $10 US, and you got a beautiful plate of food, a nice side dish, and a local drink. Like, unbelievable. You have to go to this place if you go to Panama City. Highly recommended, 5 stars. To go along with the food and eating out and the experiences of being out in Panama, I do have to say Panama is not cheap. The prices, especially in Panama City, are very similar to what you're going to find in a major city in the United States. If you get out of the city, I mean, it gets a little bit cheaper, but remember, you're paying in US dollars, so you don't get any benefit of currency exchange. And there's a lot of demand for like apartments, for like restaurant space, for all this stuff in Panama City, because that's the heart of the country. And they have the Panama Canal, which jacks up the prices because they're getting a lot of foreign dollars in Panama. So if you go there, be ready to spend pretty much local prices when you go to the country. As we typically do with these videos, we're gonna finish up with my top list of places to visit. These are places I've either been and had a great time, or some of my local Panamanian friends have recommended as definitely worth a visit. Number 1, you're gonna regardless spend some time in Panama City, and having been in Panama City, it's a really interesting city with a very modern vibe. It wasn't necessarily my favorite city I've been to in the world, but I think that it has a lot to offer, starting of course with the Casco Viejo, or their old town. Very beautiful old town, really nice sort of colonial era buildings, good restaurants, good bars, they have hotels in there. It's a good place to start your vacation in Panama. Secondarily, in Panama City, they also have, as I said, Panama Vieja, which is basically the old city that was destroyed by the pirates. That city is very unique. You can sort of get a taste of the very old colonial history of Panama. And it actually goes with this triangle of cities. There's 2 in the north on the Caribbean side, and there's 1 on the south where Panama City is. These 3 places, the Fort of San Lorenzo, which is north and west of Panama City, Panama Vieja, which is in Panama City, which is like right there, and then northeast is a city called Portobello, or Beautiful Port, or Beautiful Door, whatever you want to say. Those 3 cities are sort of the 3 ancient sort of cultural cities of Panama. They're all worth seeing, sort of similar, but like very cool. Panama City itself also has lots of immigrant communities, and they also have a pretty notable Chinatown. So if you want to try some immigrant cuisine and sort of see all the different sort of variations that the city has to offer, that's a good place to do it. Panama really feels like an American city in a lot of ways. It's a driving city. It's got big streets. It's not a very walkable city in a lot of senses, but they have a lot of new money, new buildings, new apartments. So if you want to have sort of like an up-class, sort of Miami-esque trip, Panama City is pretty cool, I have to say. So if you want to get out of Panama City and you want to explore the different regions that Panama has to offer, the first and foremost thing is you can of course go to beaches and different islands, either by like little hopper planes or by ferry. The most famous is the San Blas Islands, where people go surfing, people chill on the beach, people have this sort of like beach vacation vibe. Super nice, highly recommended. Also, secondarily, you can go to a national park called Bocas del Toro, where they have really great biodiversity. You can see lots of different tropical animals, flora and fauna. Really highly recommended, and a very cool place to go. If you want to go up north towards the Costa Rican border, there's a larger city called David, which sits within the region called Chiriquí. They're known for their fincas, or coffee production. You can try a lot of different coffee and cocoa type products there. It's very jungly, very humid, and they also have a very high proportion of indigenous population people there. So you can actually go to these traditional villages and interact with the indigenous communities of Panama, which is quite different than what you'd find within Panama City. Lastly, and maybe most importantly, is the Panama Canal. I think if you go to Panama, the Panama Canal is something you should definitely check out. It's historic, it's got a really cool history, it's the main economic driver of Panama. It's a point in the world that is so important to global trade and to how global society functions. And it's really just this waterway that cuts through this country that is not that wide. So you can go there, they have a cool little museum, and then you can watch the boats go through the various locks that connect basically the Atlantic Ocean within the Caribbean to the Pacific Ocean. It's very interesting. They sort of have it like a platform where you can watch the boats go and people applaud as the boat goes through. It's very fun, but I think it's a great place to get in touch with Panama's like deeper culture and importance. And anytime you travel to a country, that's like something you should be looking for. So as a final note, I would say that Panama is pretty expensive, reasonably safe, and a great place to spend, let's say, between 3 and 5 days exploring the country, unless you just want to have a longer, nicer Miami type trip in Panama City. That's going to do it for me in this video. I hope you found these tips helpful. I try to give you kind of a local vibe and interpretation of what's going on, as I actually have Panamanian friends and I've spent time there, and it's a place that I particularly enjoyed and would like to recommend to others. If you have any questions, you can of course comment below, or you can book private travel consulting with me. I have a link in the description that you can click on and we can get that done. I am of course cooking a dish from every country in the world. I hope you join me for that on my Instagram and on my TikTok. You can find that. I haven't cooked a dish for Panama. I'm debating between sancocho, the soup, or making some patacones with some sort of sauce. You know, some typical Panamanian stuff. It's all gonna be delicious. So that being said, thank you guys for sticking around with me. If you made it this far in the video, you're a legend, and I will see you in the next one. Hasta luego, mi amigos.